And we are live. Welcome, everybody. It is October 28th, 2025, 2 p.m. here on the East Coast. Of course, my name is Castaldo, and this is the Space Water Podcast where we dive into the sound of the light. Today's episode 77, and we have a very special guest. He's become a good buddy of the show and a friend and colleague over the last few months, and I'm proud to share some airwaves and some time with him today. If you haven't seen him before on my show, well, you're in for a treat, everybody. His name is Laird Scranton. He's an author of well over a dozen books. He's an expert in various categories, as well as a very intelligent man. And it's a pleasure to be here today with him. Laird, I appreciate you coming back on my show. Thank
Oh,
you.
it's my pleasure. I'm glad you invited me back so soon. We have lots to talk about.
I agree. I agree. And although today's show is maybe considered a lot of speculation, I think it's a really important topic, and I think there's been a lot of speculation about Three Eye Atlas,
Right.
and I found some of your assessment pretty interesting and very well thought out, and I like the fact that we all have our misconceptions and maybe a lot of opinions about AI, but I like the fact how you're using it to verify some of your theories. I kind of do the same thing in my own way.
Uh-huh.
And it's very interesting because the way you're doing it is a way where you're not really telling them why you're looking for the answer, but that
Right.
the answer is fitting what you're looking for.
Right. Well, and I mean, the AI has the capability when we're talking about a sort of a nuanced subject to put me in the ballpark of what the right answer is. And then from there, I have things to go, um, track down through other authoritative sources. I'm not just taking the AI's response, but you have to be very
Yeah.
careful about how you pose a question to the AI because ask it one way and you get one answer, ask it another way, you get a different answer. For example, with Three Eye Atlas, I asked it what the original tracked speed of the object was when they first discovered it, and it told me 130,000 miles per hour. I thought, okay. Then I discovered that it had originally been had a different designation. Originally, they thought it was an asteroid, and they had given it a different label. So I posed the same question again: what was the speed of it under that original label? And I discovered it was 152,000 miles per hour. So you have to be intelligent about how you frame the
Yeah.
question, and if you don't get a sensible answer back when you frame it one way, you need to try it a couple of different ways to try to, you know, overcome whatever exception the AI comes up with. The one thing I like about Google's AI is that it will troubleshoot the question as well as give you the answer. That it'll say, the terms that you're combining in this search don't really go together, except if you stand on your head and look at it this way, well, then maybe they go together. But so it's doing us a favor by sort of calling out nonsense at the same time that it's answering the question.
Yeah, I noticed that. Then now let me ask you a question. Do you find it important, or do you yourself tend to maybe thank the AI or say things in response
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. I'll pose statements and information and questions to the AI. If the AI gives me a response that I know full well is not correct, and I have an objective demonstration that it's not correct, I'll I'll pose a statement to the Google's AI saying, "Look, here's the reason why what you just told me isn't right." And there have been instances where then days later
wow,
I discovered that it's actually citing the thing that I gave it.
wow, whoa, that's crazy. Wow. So there goes to show you, it's just a conglomeration of everything that's in the internet ether.
Right. Um, That's true. The other day I was discussing a topic with it, and it says, "Well, there's no confirmed proof that this piece of the thing is is correct." And I said to it, "So that makes you a prime candidate to cross confirm it." And eventually, agreed that there was a possibility that might cooperate, work cooperatively with me to try to pin down some of the stuff I'm trying to track down.
Oh man. Wow, that is incredible. That is incredible. Well, I like it since people that's joining us. This is Laird Scranton, and we're discussing what the possibilities of Three Eye Atlas can be, and we're getting into some of the AI assessment of some of the theories. And I like the fact that you made the correlation, and I haven't seen anybody else make this correlation. I had brought it up in a conference that I did a few weeks ago that I'm not sure exactly when Three Eye Atlas was discovered, but apparently they made it known to the public on July 1st. And then on
Right.
July 2nd, there's a day-long mysterious gamma ray burst that nobody correlates with it.
Well, actually, initially they did. Apparently, there was a Facebook post that went out
Oh, they
at
did.
around that time that correlated the burst to the references to other events that happened the same day. But I know what they're talking about is the gamma ray
Yeah.
burst. I mean, it is the
Three
Three
Eye
Eye Atlas
Atlas.
discovery. But they say Atlas, right? So they said that that was a mistaken post because they later, using
Huh.
other equipment, were able to confirm that it came from very distant galaxy. The thing is that there are energetics at work here that theory flatly says has the capability of making such a gamma burst look like it happened very distantly when it didn't, that it's an optical illusion. It's like seeing water in the distance on the highway on a hot day. It looks for
Yeah.
all the world like it's correct, but it's not. And so we have a perspective from which the fact that separates the gamma ray burst from the Three Eye Atlas discovery is an illusion.
What's that? T I Atlas. Three Eye Atlas is what? I didn't hear that last word.
That the rationale they give for disconnecting the gamma ray burst from Three Eye Atlas is based on something that quite possibly is an illusion, and in theory,
Oh.
it would actually happen that if you looked at the results of a gamma ray burst from a collapsing warp bubble, that it would erroneously look like it had originated far, far away.
Wow. So you think it could have been due to something like Three Eye Atlas propulsion?
Well, what happens is that with in theory, with the creation of a warp bubble, which they've only managed to succeed at doing on a very, very microscopic scale. This is still in its infancy in terms of actually doing it, but there's lots and lots of theory about it. When you collapse, the problem with a warp bubble is that as the ship is being transported great distances inside that bubble, ions and other forms of energetics are collecting inside that bubble more and more. The longer the journey, the more gets collected. And when the bubble bursts, that all that energy is released in the form of gamma rays and in forms of X-rays. There are certain dynamics to an uncontrolled release could be very, 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 very dangerous, which is
Yeah.
why in science fiction you see the writers saying that they dropped out of warp travel far distantly from where the planets are and then approach the planets, is because that burst of gamma rays could do terrible things to real objects.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if I think they called it a blazar when it's like directed at its observer, like Earth.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
one way they have proposed of dealing with that is to find a way to release those gamma rays in several waves, not several bursts, not just one burst. And the
Hmm.
gamma ray burst that was detected on July 2nd happened in that way. It happened in four bursts, which is really unusual for they've never seen it before for a gamma ray burst. Gamma ray bursts tend to destroy the object that emits it. And so there's one burst and that's it. But not with this. There were three or four bursts. Also, the gamma ray burst from a warp bubble, it tends to be preceded by a burst of X rays, which this was also preceded by that. So the gamma ray burst came from the same general direction. They won't tell us specifically what their telescopes were pointed at, but both Three Eye Atlas and the gamma ray burst came from the same general direction in relation to us.
So not only was it mysteriously long, but it was mysteriously doing repetitions.
Right. And okay, the fact that the gamma ray burst wasn't detected for a day after the detection of the object is okay because there are time dilation effects involved that could delay the burst, our detection of the burst for that long period of time.
So what? So they don't think it's from like some sort of black hole consuming some sort of.
They have no theory as to what created this gamma ray burst. It's unlike anything they've seen in 50 years.
Oh, yeah, and the mathematical possibility of that happening right around the time we have this mysterious interstellar visitor that we've never seen before.
Yeah, at the same moment. I mean, coincidences do happen, but what I've been trying to do is narrow the possibility of coincidence by citing item after item after item that is in agreement because of it. A recent post, this just yesterday, has to do with the shifting colors of Three-Eye Atlas, which they also can't explain why it began as the color it was and why it went through the shifts that it did. As a matter of fact, I came across one report that said at the time that they initially observed it, it was going through a series of color shifts that they couldn't explain. But again, theoretically, that's an attribute that applies to the collapse of the warp bubble, that it would look from a distance like it was changing colors.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. So, have you explored the possibility? Well, I don't know where it originates from, but it's pretty interesting that when we first discovered it, it was in the same area where the WOW signal was also found in 1977.
Right.
You know,
So, and I don't think anybody has an objective view on what that was, but I
yeah,
know the one of the other
Sagittarius
objects
was
that
it?
came,
And which is it? Sagittarius, right?
another of the interstellar objects that came through was also preceded by a day by a gamma ray burst.
Yeah, I think it's in
So,
Sagittarius, right? Which is like the center of the Milky Way.
yeah, that's right. Now, this gamma ray burst is a tell. The thing is that they aren't experienced yet at specifically tying that to the collapse of a warp bubble, but every collapse of every warp bubble ought to produce one, which means it's going to be very hard for somebody to sneak up on it.
Huh. Interesting. Interesting. Very cool. So let's get into the possibilities of what this can be. I mean, because you explored the fact that it could be some type of plasma engine or plasma craft, which
Right. Well,
I
okay.
found interesting.
When we go back to the start of this, there are a series of things that went on. Almost immediately, astronomers started citing attributes of Three-Eye Atlas that don't accrue to any known natural object, not to a comet. They couldn't even propose an object that would do this thing. So the first of those was it was venting CO2 and nickel, which a comet shouldn't do. So, starting with those two facts, I went exploring for what kind of interstellar transport could potentially do that. And what I came up with was what's called a nickel CO2 reactor, um, which would have the potential to do both. Okay, another fact that was cited was that it was glowing from the front and the back, which in that kind of a reactor, the plasma could cause it to do glow from the front and from the back. Um, it was moving at an incredible speed for us. 130,000 miles per hour is pretty fast. In terms of light speed, it's not. It would to get from the nearest star in Sagittarius, it would take 50,000 years at that speed. I did the math the other day.
Wow, that's
So,
incredible.
okay, so I double checked that kind of a reactor could propel a craft at 130,000 miles per hour.
And it would have to be massive.
Well, yeah, I checked on that too. They said that because of how little the craft is being influenced by non-gravitational forces like venting, they could calculate that it had to be at least 33 billion tons.
Mod on.
So I double checked what the smallest size would be for a nickel CO2 reactor and discovered it would have to be at least billions of tons.
Oh my God. Wow. That's incredible. Because yeah, I speculated with the AI, like what, and it was a little similar to yours. I first asked, could it be a plasma and water, type of
Right.
craft? And they
Right.
were like, well, it would have to be, massive to carry such water. And then I was like, well, maybe could it be, programming its coordinates so it's timing itself to absorb the water from comets and maybe the plasma from coronal mass ejections.
No, actually, what it looks like to me is there's a variation on the nickel CO2 plasma reactor that is called a nickel CO2 oxygen CO2 plasma reactor. And when you add
Interesting.
oxygen into that mix, it absolutely has the capability to vent lots of water.
Wow.
Okay, another thing they said was that it was venting cyanide.
Huh.
Well, the same reactor can do that if there's also nitrogen involved.
Whoa. Whoa.
So each time they would come up with one of these anomalous
You're just
attributes, they
checking it
said,
off the list. You're checking
yeah,
it off the list.
yeah. Every time they would announce one, I would check it out against that particular kind of a reactor, and every time it proved out.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. That's
So you were
incredible.
talking about speculation. Speculation is when you present an idea without compelling supporting facts. At
Huh.
every stage of this, I have been trying to support my statements with compelling facts.
So yeah, well, yeah, you,
So
you
it
speculate
doesn't
with
really
your first
qualify as
theory, but then you bring the
speculation.
supporting evidence. Yeah.
Right. I mean, if the scientists are saying this doesn't align with any natural object we know, we'd have to be stupid not to consider, well, then could it be a non-natural object? That's the other possibility. Well, there's a third possibility that it's a natural object we've never encountered. But as these attributes mount up, it becomes less and less and less likely that some exotic, non-natural object is going to have all the same attributes as this kind of a reactor.
That's incredible. Do you think that there, if it was that type of reactor, that it would be manned by a whole crew, or it could be self-propelling itself?
Well, that's a good question. In the fake video that of um, Michio Keku that was circulating yesterday.
So fake. That yeah, that picture. I mean, where would they
Yeah,
have taken it from? I mean, that
yeah, I don't
video.
know.
Like, how
In that
close?
fake video, what they had him saying was the thing that frightened him was that this thing had been traveling for millions of years. Well, first of all, it wouldn't take millions of years to get from Sagittarius. It would only take 50,000 years to get here from there. But the second thing is that if their analysis of it missed all of the warp bubble aspects. If it's traveling by warp under warp power, it doesn't need to take 50,000 years to get here.
That's true. That's true. It could happen really fast.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot to it. Okay, then the question is, early on they were asking, persistently asking, has the thing changed speed? Has the thing changed direction? Because those would be signs that of intelligence.
Yeah.
And they kept insisting, no, it wasn't. It had been at a consistent 130,000 miles per hour. But the truth is that it dramatically dropped its speed from the time they first saw it. It dropped by 15,000 miles per hour by the time it was reported as.
And then it sort of went right towards our inner solar system along the ecliptic.
Well, that's okay. NASA has said if they were planning an exploratory mission, they could not do a better job of establishing a track for their probe than what this is following. So
Yeah.
we have every reason to think this is an exploratory craft.
Yeah, like it lined up with our, what was it, the vernal equinox?
Right, but I mean, it lined up with the plane of the planet that the planets orbit in, and
Yeah.
it was on a specific track to be able to observe the largest number of planets it could on one pass through at 130,000 miles per hour.
Wow. And it's like just when we were gonna get the best view of it, it's gonna be hiding behind the
Well,
sun, huh?
yeah, that as it approaches us, this
Yeah.
this reflects knowledge that they understood that we
Yep.
were in a position to interfere with it.
Yep. And that we had the capabilities to view it.
Right, that's right. So that is potentially intentional. I take it as intentional. Now, the other thing is that we're facing what amounts to objectively a conspiracy among the astronomers around the globe because they absolutely have access to satellite based cameras that could observe this thing when it's opposite the sun from us. They're doing studies of the sun right now that they have cameras trained over there. They absolutely have photographs of this thing, even from October 3rd. Avi Loeb was harping on October 3rd for a month or more. This is when we're going to get our best image of it. Then suddenly on October 4th, nobody's releasing anything. All they're releasing are these, fuzzy Bigfoot quality images that don't tell us anything. Certainly they know more than that. And now the question is, why wouldn't they release that? Why would all of them? And if you presume that there's not a conspiracy, why would all of them independently decide not to release it? Well, it's because none of them wants to be the single-handed agent of disclosure, because that's what this amounts to. As soon as they say that it's non-human technology, that's disclosure.
Yeah. How how familiar or do you have you read any like theosophy from people like Rudolf Steiner or Alice Bailey or anything like that?
Not deeply. I'm just generally familiar, not specifically familiar.
Well, there's one little thing I'd like to mention. Alice Bailey, she wrote in the 1930s
Right,
how, and you don't have to hold this with any weight. This, just could be just whatever. You don't have to take it because supposedly she channeled this information from someone she called the Tibetan Dawaj Kul. But she wrote a whole series of books, Alice Bailey, and in the 1930s, she wrote a book I have here called The Externalization of the Hierarchy. Right? And she talks about how
right,
in 1939, she said that in the year 2025, there will be an externalization of some celestial hierarchy. So, like an externalization, some celestial hierarchy is going to reveal itself that was previously unseen.
right. Well, that's a pretty good prediction because that's basically what we're seeing with these interstellar objects.
Yeah.
But nobody is admitting it. Shortly, they may have to admit it because lots of telescopes on the Earth are going to be able to see this object tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. That's why I wanted to talk about tomorrow is the time, right? Tomorrow is the time to view it, and wow. So, what do you have any predictions about what we're gonna any new findings that's gonna be revealed tomorrow? Or
No, I mean, as I said, all of the evidence points to the fact that it's non-human technology, and lots of evidence points to the fact that it arrived here by warp power. And um, I doubt we'll get anybody to confess that, but the fact still remains that those attributes are there. And I keep trying as I uncover the next one, I keep trying to mention it. Say, look at here's something unique about the collapse of a warp bubble that by theory happens, and we saw it at the same time that we were identifying this object.
yeah, so I mean, if it's an unmanned, if it's a man-made or a creature made or whatever made craft,
Right.
then it has to be investigating our solar system if from what it's doing right now. I mean, obviously, it's not just randomly flying through and on that path.
No, but if it had wanted to be destructive to us, all it had to do was drop out of warp speed closer to the planet.
Yeah. No, no, I don't think it's but what if it's not just scouting but outgassing material that is slowly seeding the inner solar system?
That's possible, but again, we don't. th- There are 1,000 different things that are possible, and we can't sign on to all of them without a specific reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. It's incredible. It's incredible to think that it could be some sort of massive craft like that that we just are so far beyond even the possibility of understanding what it could be doing even.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that we have the potential to learn from what it's doing. We have, and from what it's venting and so forth, if our intention is to develop warp capability, we want to pay really close attention to what this thing did. I've been trying to track back. I know that the first sighting of it was on June 14th. Actually, I think there's a reference to it on June 13th under the original asteroid name. I want to know what the history of the photographs from those telescopes were on the days leading up to that. Did it suddenly just blip onto their screen? What happened? The first image they had of it, the description is as sort of a gassy cloud. That's exactly what a warp bubble should look like as it's in motion.
Wow. It's very interesting.
It was also the right color to be a warp bubble. That
Hmm.
a warp bubble should exhibit blue shift. And their first reports of it, they classified it actually that the designation they gave it um, specifically implies a blue tinted
Like a blue
asteroid.
shift that is heading towards us type blue shift, or red shift.
Well, yeah.
Red
Normally,
would
when
be
it's
moving
heading,
away,
yeah,
right?
blue, yeah, right. That's right. So we the an observer that it's moving towards should see it, the warp bubble as blue until it collapses, and then it should suddenly shift to red, which is what this device did. This object did.
Wow. So
We
so when
saw.
it shifts red, that means it's moving now away from us.
Well, it is, or just because there's time dilation involved,
Huh.
that it appears to be moving away from
Appear.
us.
I get it. Very interesting. Very interesting.
And that's why the all of the tracking of the gamma ray burst looks like it was very distantly far away from us, is because that's what the effect of the time dilation is.
Whole blue redshift thing. You know that this makes me think of right now is that blue star Kachina prophecy.
Right, that's
You know
right.
how they
Yes.
say that they're gonna remove their mask and reveal themselves,
Yeah,
and it's a blue star Kachina. That sounds like something that's heading towards you. That's a star
yeah,
that's now visible.
absolutely, absolutely.
Wow, that's like the blue shift.
Well, I
Oh.
mean, there's also talk, you know, biblical talk, which I don't really credit, of uh, basically angel-like souls of people returning just before, in the same era of time. Well, all of the energetic orbs that we have witnessed last December above New Jersey and more recently over Scandinavia and over Europe and places like that, the ancient term for those orbs means the ancient conception of those orbs is as messengers, which is the word that the term angel is derived from. These are
Yeah,
anciently these are treated as um, one of their purposes is to communicate between Hindu-like levels of consciousness, which are energetic consciousnesses. And so
I agree.
there
I
are
agree with some of it.
lots of perspectives to think that some of these prophecies might have been based on some kind of genuine knowledge. I'm not really a proponent of prophecies, and I'm certainly not a proponent of biblical prophecies. There are the Bible era references are from the year zero. The symbolic references I write about are largely from the year around 3000 BC, so 1,000 years further removed from the Bible era than we are.
Yeah, yeah,
So for me, the Bible references are not worth a lot because 3,000 years is a long time for us for a symbolic concept to hold its form.
yeah. I mean, you see, it can't. Yeah, I agree. Like when you go through a lot, like even when I was looking for the coronal mass ejections recently for the book I'm writing, I found like a lot of in the Bible is talked about in Chaldean tablets and Sanskrit and various things are, it's taken and changed, to fit the
Yeah,
times
and
or
also
whatever.
there's a lot of obvious manipulation that happens with biblical texts,
Yeah.
where somebody had a political agenda that they were trying to accomplish. Um, uh, for example, they've tried very hard, the best they can, to disconnect Judaism from the Canaanite worship of Asherah and El,
Yeah.
the goddess and the god. But they miss certain things. They have not been thorough about what they've done to try to scrub that stuff. For example, the name Israel itself, in the Hebrew language, it means to struggle with God.
Yeah, wow.
There's a Canaanite word, Isharael, that also means to struggle with God, but it combines the names of Ishara, which is Asherah, and
Yeah,
El, which is El.
yeah. The
The
two
very
supreme
name of
deities.
the very name of Israel says, "Look at
Wow.
our tradition is based on these Canaanite gods."
Wow. That's true.
You can't
You
you
know,
can't hide that. You can't duck from that.
yeah, and I found it interesting that they didn't mention in the Bible. Like there's a part in the Bible where the prophet Elijah is going to war against the prophets of Baal, who's basically
Right,
the son of Asherah and El, right?
right,
Supposedly, right?
right. Yeah,
But there's
cosmologically, the phonetic ba refers to the establishment of a place or space. It
yeah, I
refers to
don't
a
think these are people at all. They're like cosmic laws and principles, but this is the
right,
way it's presented.
right,
But so like they have uh in the story of the Bible, they have the prophet Elijah who's going to war against the prophets of Baal, and also there's 400 prophets of Baal, and there's 400 something prophets of Asherah. But
right,
after the prophets of Baal go to war with Elijah and Elijah wins, he lights the altar of Yahweh on fire. He sacrifices all the prophets of Baal, but they don't mention what happens to the prophets of
right,
Asherah. I always found
right,
that interesting that they leave that
right.
out.
So I came across this week a reference to a temple in northern Israel from around 500 AD. And the artifact they dug up has carved into it um, two icons of the goddess Asherah.
I think they call them like
It's
teraphim,
right. It's
teraphim.
the shape of an eye, basically, in the Hamsa hand. Both of those are icons of the goddess Asherah. That demonstrates that late into the process in northern Israel, what's now northern Israel, at a Jewish temple, that they still were celebrating Asherah.
Wow, 500 AD. That's wow. That's incredible. Yeah, those I think they're called like a teraphim.
Yeah.
Those little objects of worship. Yeah, they have a lot of them that are
Right.
like to Astarte, Ashtaroth, and Anath, and
Right.
Asherah. Very
Right.
similar ones. Yeah.
That's right. And so there's a lot to be tracked, but the trick is, in all of these cases, is to try to come up with some absolutely unique factor that can't be mistaken, and then demonstrate a connection between two cultures or two, um, philosophies based on that. Because anytime you can bring things down to an intuitive comparison between two things like that, it's very, very hard for anybody to argue that it's wrong.
Yeah, that's true. It's very true. So do you have any thoughts or speculations or theories on what if it is some sort of craft what the mission is and what the because I had I had a vision like a sort of a dream vision about this that it had to do with some sort of insectoid type beings, but I can't prove that. And then I scribbled something on a page when I woke up that I wrote al Bada, and that literally means emergence, or something like that in Muslim. So I don't know why that word came to me, if it means
It's
anything significant.
al-Bada.
Al Bada, Bada, or something like that. Al Bada, or Al or Ael, Al
Right,
Bada. And I looked it up, and that from what I looked up, it does mean emergence in Muslim, in Islam or Muslim.
right. Well, in cosmology, um, that word implies an aspect of the materialization of space.
Wow, wow, huh?
Now,
That's very interesting.
the energy dynamics that are behind a warp bubble are the same energy dynamics that are behind the materialization of energy.
I just got goosebumps.
And the the a lot of the attributes and the effects and the way those warp bubbles work in theory line right up with stuff I've been writing about in terms of root unit of materializing energy is called a beat frequency. Now, what a beat frequency is, to put this in the context for people, is you're familiar with a beat frequency. If you've ever driven your car on a highway and rolled down just one window, you probably heard a whacka, 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 whacka sound. That's a beat frequency. The reason it happens is because you set up two waves, two acoustic waves that are persistently moving in and out of phase with each other. And as they do that, when they're in phase, the sound gets loud. And when they're out of phase, the sound cancels and it gets quiet. And so it goes this repeating cycle of wacka, wacka, wacka. That's exactly what causes electromagnetic energy that begins as a wave, actually begins as two waves, to self-differentiate into quanta. This is part of the particle-like aspect of energy. It's both wave-like and particle-like because the waves naturally self-differentiate into these little units that are beats.
And you found all sorts of proof that the Dogon were talking about this, and that it might even be related to the Serpent Mound.
Well, okay, we have basically two philosophies that the ancient cosmologies rest on. The first one is called Samkhya. It All of the major classic cosmological traditions in India rest on Samkhya. And
Yeah.
Samkhya, um, the focus of Samkhya is on how two energies, one considered to be non-material and feminine, the other one considered to be material and masculine, how they interface with each other. And the reason that the focus is because absolutely everything depends on that one set of interactions. As a matter of fact, the Dogons say nothing else exists except those interactions. And so the Dogan system is much, much more specific and detailed. And they're giving us not only descriptions of things that are scientifically accurate, they're supporting them with drawings that are interchangeable with the diagrams that people like Stephen Hawking include in their books. Um, and they're defined by terms that have symbolism to them. Every syllable represents a concept. When you substitute concepts for the syllables, the word explains to you its own meaning, and those meanings all have to do with how these energies work. And it gets very specific down to how energy begins in a pure domain of energy, a domain of pure energy, and how it makes its way into a domain of materialized energy of things like atoms and you know stars and planets and solar systems.
Yeah, it's like a
That's the focus of what my books are on, especially the latest books, the last 3 books, last 4 books are probably on this topic of, the very specific details of what these energies do to produce that.
and where people can find your books on Amazon and everywhere to buy books.
Yeah, they're available everywhere on Amazon. I have an author page on simonandschuster.com. I have one on innertraditions.com, and the books are on Amazon globally. Um, so they're pretty easy to find. The books that are most specific about these energies are one is called Amma and the Spark of the Universe. Another one is called The Waters of Life. In a few months, I'll release a book called The Third Eye. And there's a book just prior to those called Seeking the Primordial that has a lot of the background information for how we get to this stuff.
Very cool, very cool. I just had to plug my charger in real quick for the laptop. Very cool. So let's get into a little bit. Do you have a couple more minutes?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Cool. So let's get more into a little bit more about the Three Eye Atlas. A little bit more we could talk about it. I feel that there's going to be more revealed to it, but I think that NASA or our government or militaries even they might be not revealing much more. Like they might have already learned much more about it than we realize, and maybe have received some sort of communication.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know about communications, but I do know that once the object moves out from behind the sun, they're going to have a very hard time stopping every two-bit punk with a telescope from looking at it.
Yeah, yeah. You think anything's going to
As a
be?
matter of fact, I posted images that were acquired by a European um, individual, a private researcher who had access to a feed from what's called the TD Observatory down in the Cayman Islands. And the TD Observatory is one of the primary observers of the sun, and they have access to feeds from space-based telescopes. So they aren't blocked by the sun from a view of this thing. And the image he posted is a really, really credible image. And the object takes the same configuration as what online is depicted as one of the three most likely shapes for the type of reactor I've been exploring, the nickel CO2 plasma reactor.
So
It's also the most likely shape, in theory, for a warp drive.
wow, that's very interesting. So if it was using sort of a plasma engine, I mean, you would have to be using magnetic fields to accelerate the plasma.
Yes, which is why, recently, last week or the week before, there was a coronal mass ejection from the sun,
Yeah,
which I know is your area. And the plasma that was ejected from the sun hit 3I Atlas, which is inexplicable, as you have an object that is halfway between Mars and the sun. For it specifically to get hit by this ejection seems hugely coincidental, but it's
incredible.
not, because another of the attributes of that kind of a reactor is it creates a very strong magnetic field, and those plasma ejections tend to follow the lines of magnetic fields. So in effect, it draws the plasma right to it. That may be one of the ways that it recharges.
So it would be like what they would call maybe like essentially biting the nickel,
Yeah, yes, yes.
right?
And and that's right.
You like that, huh?
I do like it. That's great.
Yeah,
As I said, if you imagine that a nickel reactor is this capable, imagine what they could have done if they invested a quarter.
yeah. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, it's incredible. Well, I think that you're probably most likely on the right track. That it's got to be some sort of craft, and I mean, it could be. I mean, basically, that would be more like a cold fusion type device, right?
Um, it's basically using CO2 and nickel to create plasma, and then the plasma is the the factor that drives the motion of the object. But actually, inside of a warp bubble, the object doesn't have to be moving very much. Um, Chances are it was, because when it first emerged from the bubble, from my point of view, they measured it at 152,000 miles per hour. So there might be a reason why it's easier to create a warp bubble when you're moving at that speed.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. So like, and essentially, it could be like I was saying, like a plasma, but also like it's like biting nickel in water,
Yes, that's right. That's right.
right?
Yeah, that
Whoa,
could.
that's incredible. Wow. And that means that there's some sort of, you know, plasma type of spacecraft that's making it move that from that. I mean,
Right,
that's insane.
right.
That's
And
insane. That's insane. And to be that huge.
right. It'd have to be that huge, according to Google's AI, in order to carry the raw materials that it needs to make that work. It would have to be
Well,
that big, or it'd have to at least be billions of tons, if not 33 billion tons.
well, that's what I wanted to speculate and ask you more about is that do you think it's possible that they're programming that this craft is coordinates is theoretically designed to follow where the water and the plasma is like where the coronal like where the suns are that are producing coronal mass ejections at a highly like right now our sun is really active,
Yeah,
you
it
know?
is. But it looks to me as if, based on the way it's moving and the way it arrived here, it looks to me as if it's on sort of a, a multi-star journey here.
Huh.
Okay, and so if it is, then after it gets past us, we should see it re signs that it is reestablishing its warp bubble to move on to whatever the next star is.
Wow, that's incredible. So do you think that there's more to the story, that it has anything to do with the planet Earth, or do you think it has more to do with stars, star systems, solar systems?
Well, I mean, it looks to me, because of its track, it looks to me like it's an exploratory. They're trying to learn more about our star system. And
Yeah,
at the same time, they're using the stars as a way to essentially refuel the ship to move it on to the next star.
and
And then,
it seems to be that they understand that we have the technologies to possibly view it,
I
because
mean, they
obvious.
probably have good cause to track a wide berth around us. You know, they
Yeah.
know that we're not the kinds of dudes they want to be interacting with.
Yeah, this is the kind of people that destroy themselves every minute of the day.
Right. And that if we had an opportunity to interfere with it, we probably
We would.
would, and
We
they
would.
wouldn't want that.
We would rape
So
and
it's
pillage
moving through
everything they have.
as fast as it possibly can to spend as little time in our neighborhood as it can.
We would rape and pillage everything they had. Yeah, we are a warrior species, unfortunately. Yeah, I think in the chat room there's somebody called Warp Mode, and they're saying
Okay.
that there were ejections from the sun, and they kind of followed the path of Three Eye Atlas. Three ejections from the sun hit Three Eye Atlas.
And that is an impossible coincidence.
Can't be. Yeah, that's
Well, my
incredible.
my
And
teachers taught that as you're exploring a scientific question, when you bump up against what looks like the third coincidence, it's time to consider that something beyond coincidence is happening.
yeah, and David Von Valet in the chat room is asking, are there any exact measurements from Three Eye Atlas, and what is the shape exactly does it have?
Okay. The original descriptions of it were that it was round and it was probably about 12 miles in diameter.
Whoa.
Now, since that time, they've revised estimates of how big it is. At one point, I heard like a 20-mile um, di- um, diameter for it or measurement for it, but then they downsized that to about 7 miles. So my guess is it's somewhere between 12 and 7 miles in diameter, and it's likely round. The image I posted of it absolutely makes it appear round.
Wow. That's incredible. So it's not like a cigar shaped like people are making it seem to be.
No, actually, the shape of it is looks like a hydrogen atom in terms of what it appears like. Or you've seen these depictions of round starships,
Yeah.
round,
I mean, that
right?
shape that they're showing is it because like everything is it's streaming, everything looks like that from space, like
No, those are the streaks of the
the
stars.
streaks.
Okay, when they try to take an image of the object, their telescope has got to track along with the object, and as it does that, because this is a time lapse picture,
Yeah.
all the stars that are in the neighborhood look like streaks instead of
Yes.
looking like stars.
Yes. Yeah, so that's not the shape.
No, it's
Everybody's
not
assuming
not
that's
the
the
shape.
shape. Yeah.
Right.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It really is amazing. People are loving it in the chat room as well. It's a very intelligent conversation about it, because there's real evidence behind what you're talking about, and the way you verified it, I find it really intriguing.
Well, thanks. I mean, this is what you have to do to try to cross confirm something that's controversial. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
you
true.
have to be able to anchor it in some way to something real, and you got to say the reason that I think this is because, and give them something.
It's true. Do you think in any way that it's going to change the course of human civilization? That this
Personally, I think yes. I mean, we've just been visited by a starship from my perspective. You know,
Yeah.
this is that whether anybody admits it or not, this is the um, benign disclosure everybody's been asking for.
Huh, right in front of our
Be-
eyes.
Because of the track that the object's on, I can't think of I'm a symbolist. I can't think of a better symbolic way to express the idea that we don't mean any harm here. This is exploratory.
Yeah, they're asking in the chat room, you think will it show itself?
Well, I mean, when it comes out from behind the sun, we're going to see it. So yeah, I do. Tomorrow we're going to see it, I think. And if the track record of the astronomers is anything, nobody's going to show us a decent picture of it.
That's so true. That's so true. That's so
But
true.
from that, we have an objective view of which people exactly is it who are lying to us about this stuff. And we can see that there's what's tantamount to a conspiracy among all the astronomers, the mainstream astronomers of the world, to not say certain things, not show certain things. Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that they're sitting down together and conspiring with each other, but professionally, they have an ethic they're trying to uphold, and they have perspective they're trying to uphold that says they can't do it. As a freshman in college, one of the first speakers I heard was an anthropologist named Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead was the person who gave the advice to Dwight Eisenhower saying, historically, every time a lesser culture comes in contact with a greater culture, a more capable culture, really bad things happen for the lesser culture. So the longer you can stave off revealing to your populace that a greater culture exists, the better off your society is going to be.
Good advice. Yeah, I know his great granddaughter, Laura.
Well, that's great. That's
Yeah, I
great.
just spoke at a conference alongside of her, Laura Eisenhower.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, she speaks at a lot of the conferences and stuff.
Yeah, my daughter went to college with the great niece of Margaret Mead.
Wow. Wow, we have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's funny too, Laura has his face. It's very similar face to Dwight Eisenhower. If you could see
That
it.
may play better on him than on her. I don't know.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, I mean, very, very good information. Everybody's loving it in the chat room. And your book three, The Third Eye, that's coming up. I mean, is it about exactly what it seems?
Well, we're now down to the foundations of what these energetics are. And so the third eye book is about what those foundations are. And they play out in terms of one thing only. The Dogen are absolutely right. Um, when these two energies come together, there's only two things they can do. They at a certain point they reinforce each other because the wavelengths align, and at the other extreme of the point they cancel each other because the waves don't align. That simple fact is what's responsible for literally everything that happens, and it creates structures. One is an almond shaped structure. It's the shape that you see connecting two electrons when in a covalent bond when two atoms meet each other. It turns out it's
Yeah.
also the geometry of a proton. And from another perspective, it's the geometry of an electron. It's the geometry of a hydrogen atom. It's the geometry of photons of light. It's the geometry of electromagnetism. So there's only this one thing, and it's all created because two oscillations of energy that are working cooperatively with each other affect each other in particular ways, and that's the only subject that the ancient symbolism is talking about. Absolutely everything is about that in one form or another.
Wow. Well, it's interesting too. Like even like the cell, like E. coli in our stomach, that same shape.
Right, yes, absolutely.
Really interesting.
That the concept of ohm is resonance. That's
Yeah.
expressing it. When a room full of people in an echoey chamber chant ohm, they're creating resonance, and resonance is key. The resonance between those two energies. Resonance is the point at which the wavelengths of the two energies become even factors of each other. And at that point, all sorts of really interesting things happen. First of all, resistance is minimized to almost nothing. That it's possible for energy to move forward. So we can imagine that in an electromagnetic wave, the particle, which is de Broglie considered to be a near singularity in the waves, at the point of resonance, it's able to move forward to the next point of resonance. So it's basically leapfrogging from resonance point to resonance point to resonance point. In a hydrogen atom, we see that as what's called a quantum leap. The electron, after it effectively merges with the proton to temporarily create a neutron, and the electron is re-expressed out into the atom to the resonance points, which are the stable orbit.
Yeah.
It's
Wow. Yeah.
all about resonance and about these two waves of energy.
Yeah. Even plasma has,
Mhm.
attributes of collective behavior.
At Göbekli Tepe, the
Yeah.
9000 BC site in Turkey,
Yeah.
virtually every symbolic element that we see there is an alternate way of expressing the coming together of these two energies.
Wow. So you think that site was about sound and light?
Well, the ancient concept of a sanctuary itself was defined as the place where these two energies come together. Now, all of there's only a single dynamic set of dynamics of energy that first emerge primordially, but they play out in similar form on all upward scales. And so when we get to the quantum domain where we can no longer see what's going on with the energies, we don't have to guess what's going on. We can observe what these energies do on all sorts of other scales, and it's got to be exactly the same thing on the quantum scale. So the concern is the same kind of concern as an infant who has to try to figure out now, every time mommy goes out of my view, does she cease to exist? The popular view in quantum physics is yes, when the energy goes out of our view, it ceases to exist. But that's nonsense. It's nonsense for the baby, and it's nonsense with quantum physics.
Yeah.
This is all causal effects, and it all rests on the same cluster of dynamics of energy that work in a particular way, even on the quantum scale.
I like how you said all that. That's very good. Yeah, I like that. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. It's yeah, I love the comparisons that you're making. It's very similar with the Dogon is how they talk about it reminds me of the origins of Sanskrit. They literally say, like the way they eloquently put it, Laird, is that it was derived from Shiva's cosmic drum.
Right.
And it's some,
Now, let's talk about Sanskrit for a moment.
yeah,
Okay. Prior to 500 BC, every ancient language that relates to this system of symbolism, words in all these languages self-define their own meanings. Confucius wrote about it in China. He complained at 500 BC that he could no longer count on Chinese words to do that. With spoken language, the Dogon don't have a written language. They have intentionally chosen not to adopt a written language. So they only have a spoken language. In their language, every syllable represents what I call a root concept,
it's not
a
like to
basic.
socialize.
Right. Now, when they want to talk about something more complicated, they combine the right syllables together so that the concepts that go with the syllables define the concept.
Yeah.
So if we know how a Dogon word's pronounced, we can track back what the original intended meaning of the word was. We don't
So
have to
cool.
guess.
So cool.
Okay, now with Sanskrit, Rene Guénon, who's the go-to Hindu metaphysician, he says that Sanskrit language has shifted its meaning so
Oh
much
yeah.
that there are certain Sanskrit words that now carry exactly opposite meanings
I
from what they
agree. I
originally did.
100% agree.
But what he doesn't know is that Sanskrit has retained its original phonetics, and those phonetics are the same as the Dogon phonetics. So when I come
Wow.
across a Sanskrit word that I don't know what it means, I can interpret it using Dogon phonetics and find out what it meant.
Very cool.
So, like, there's a title of Ganesha, the elephant god. The title is Ganapati. Now, in modern Sanskrit, Ganapati means Lord of the Ganas. A Gana is a gathering of people for something like um, uh, what's it called? A baptism. Okay, but that's sort of a BS description. It's a non-descriptive description. If you interpret Ganapati in terms of the Dogon phonetics, Gana means world, and Pa is a syllable that refers to the expansion of space. Actually, it talks about the spinning of energy in an expanding space. So it's the definition of a
Interesting.
spiral. So Ganapati means literally the one of the world spiral. And the world spiral is a key symbolic concept in Hinduism. And
Yeah.
the symbolism of that spiral reflects all of the stages of the same energy dynamics I've been talking about. If you consider what happens with the spiral of energy, you've got all of the dynamics of energy expressed.
This is an incredible show. That's my logo too. The I always say spiral out, and I have the mystical spiral store and the spiral. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
No, you are intuitively on to a whole lot of absolutely correct stuff.
I've been that way my whole life, and I've never fit in anywhere for some
Well,
reason.
okay. One of the confusions for me, I was researching a book about ancient Chinese cosmology, and in early Chinese history, there were a series of mythical, quasi mythical emperors or instructors, um, and each one of them has a life story, a sort of a little myth that tells about who they were and what things they remembered for having done, and so forth. The myth plays out for each one plays out in terms of a series of elements that if you go to the Egyptian hieroglyphic language, the words for those elements all play out in terms of a single phonetic. There are multiple meanings of a single phonetic, and that phonetic happens to also be the name of the emperor. So as I was
Whoa.
researching this, I concluded tentatively, I said, these emperors can't be historical because nobody's life plays out like that.
Yeah.
That for it to work that way, they have to have purely been mythical. The
Yeah.
problem is that as I move on in life and I look back at the things that have happened to me and I look at the references I myself have been writing about, the references keep moving phonetically closer and closer and closer and closer to me specifically, to people I know, to places I've lived,
Yeah.
the things I've done, and so forth. I realized that 500 years from now, somebody researching me would see me in exactly that same light. This guy
Yeah.
cannot have been a real person because these things don't happen in a real
That's
life,
so
but
crazy.
they do. And I can see for you, they happen that way also. So
Yeah,
this is
it's
not
so true.
accidental.
Yeah, it's so true. You're right. You're so true. It's not. And it might be even us, you know, on our cosmic journey being recycled, possibly.
Right. When I was very close friends with John Anthony West, the Egyptologist.
Wow.
Um, he had an announcement for my first self-published book reached him, and he was interested and wanted to read it. And he contacted me, and we got together, and he filmed our first meeting. It became an episode of Magical Egypt documentary series. He personally shopped publishers for my books. He introduced me at conferences all around the country,
Wow, that's
and he
a career
got me
changing.
involved.
That's career changing right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one day, John Anthony West emails me and he says, there's a term for the kind of study you're doing. And Schwaller writes about it. He has a chapter about it in one of his books called Sacred Science. The term is the Bridge of Sirah, Sirah. And I thought, that's really interesting. So I wrote him back and I thanked him. I said, you just cleared up a huge mystery for me. When my wife's and my daughter, Hannah, was 3 years old, she started to exhibit a talent for art, although it was 3-year-old art. And she drew what was clearly a picture of me holding a guitar. And she didn't know her letters or how to read yet. She knew some of her letters, but she didn't know all of them. And at the top of the picture, she had written a series of letters that she insisted said Laird. I thought, okay. What she had written was Sirah. This was
Whoa.
this was years before the email from John, but we had the sense to frame that picture, and I have scans of it and things like that.
That's incredible.
So the concept. Okay, now it turns out Sirah is the proper name for one of the Hindu-like levels of energetic consciousness I've talked about. It's the level of consciousness that is associated with the two universes, the non-material, the energetic and the material universes are associated with phonetic that are Si and Ra. And so when you put those together, you produce the name of the consciousness that goes with that, which is Sira. Each of the levels of consciousness has a proper name like that. I know many of those names.
There's a book
I have
called Ben Sirah too, like in the Bible. I think it's in the Bible, Ben Sirah, or in a
yeah,
Hebrew.
it's
Yeah.
also in Islam. Sira is a religious term.
Yeah.
I'm reluctant a lot of times to use the proper names because I don't really know what all the ramifications are of those names. Presumably, mythically you can get control over a person by knowing their correct name. But the fact of the matter is, you can understand what their symbolism is by knowing their correct name.
Yeah,
So
it's
large
true.
part of my work is to try to track down what the actual original term was for a thing, because as soon as I arrive at that term, the phonetics of the word tell me what it's about.
It's incredible.
Uh, that causes an Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary to become an encyclopedia for me. I can look up any concept I want. If I don't know what it is, I look it up in that dictionary or in the Dogon dictionary, and whatever the words are that they use for that thing, explain in a clear way to me what the concept was about.
So you think it's possible that Sanskrit actually came from Dogon sort of tribes,
No,
or
they all came from the same tradition. No,
it's just a
the perspective
worldwide,
is
yeah,
that in ancient times there was a global
global.
instructional effort that
I
went on.
agree.
It was
Yep.
a civilizing plan with a focus on agriculture, skills of agriculture, very closely tagged to a symbolic cosmology. And the idea was that all of these acts of daily life, the rituals you performed in daily life, the structures you built, the way you plowed your field, the tools you used to plow it with, all of these things carried symbolism so that everything you did in your daily life would mnemonically reinforce the instruction you'd had about the energetics. And that's why, for groups like the Dogon, the instruction held together in very coherent form for arguably for 12,000 years.
Wow. Yeah, and you
It's
think,
it's no different than apprenticeship, where master skills of, say, woodworking were passed on from an old wood carver to a younger wood carver because they had one-on-one instruction between themselves as to how to do it. It's a very powerful way of learning something, and it's the reason why the Dogon won't adopt a written language. They see that as a degradation. You need to talk to the guy who understands the thing in order to get it
sure,
explained properly.
yeah, true. So you're coming out with the Third Eye book during Third Eye Atlas.
That's right. I hadn't thought about that. That's interesting.
It's very
That's very
interesting.
funny. I had not made that connection, but you're absolutely right. This
Right?
is
And it's literally telling you the third eye of Atlas, and Atlas was the king of, or the king, the first Atlantean king, supposedly.
right.
The
Yes,
chief
that's
of
right.
all Atlantean kings, and the third eye of Atlas. And now you're putting out a third eye book way before you knew that there was a three eye Atlas.
That's right. Oh yeah, that's right. No, all this stuff happens that way where um almost weekly I will get, maybe more often than weekly, I get communication through Facebook Messenger from people who have their own intuitive connections to things. They'll say, I had this very vivid dream. I was wondering if you could consider what it might mean. And the symbolism, the key events, the key words they heard, the sounds they heard, the effects they report seeing in the dream, all play out in the same way as um, those Chinese myths did. They play out in terms of a single phonetic value, and typically there's an additional phonetic value that's not reflected in the dream. That is what tells me what their dream was about.
Wow.
So
So
I go to an Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary, and I sort out what the meaning of the dream was based on what typically I had what happened one time in July of one year. I was researching what I thought were 6 questions for 6 friends, and one morning in July, I resolved all 6 questions with words from the same column of the same page of the Egyptian
whoa.
hieroglyphic dictionary, and there was a seventh word there that opened up an entire book for me. That it equated the concept of a pillar with the concept of the ancient concept of an embrace, which is how the relationship of these two creational energies is interpreted. That's why you have amorphous arms carved into the pillar at Göbekli
Yeah.
Tepe. They're depicting the concept of an embrace. Well, guess what? Pillar and embrace mean the same thing. By putting the picture of the embrace on the pillar, they've just named it for me. For that
Incredible.
matter, by deliberately covering up the site, they've just named for us what the site represents.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that they deliberately covered it up because maybe it was being used
Yeah.
to generate
No,
some sort of
they can tell based on the material that's used to fill it that it was deliberately and carefully covered up so as not to damage the carvings.
the structures?
Right. So it was
Wow.
deliberate covering up. Now, the same thing happened on Orkney. Before they left Orkney in
Huh.
2600 BC, they very carefully and deliberately covered a site. And as they covered the site, they left symbolic objects as part of that covering up process. And the objects explained to me what they were trying to do.
That's
And
incredible.
there's symbolism to that. The Egyptian word to cover over is a series of glyphs that repeat a ritual in Judaism. The ritual is what happens when they finish reading an instructional. Every Hebrew temple in the world is reading the same passage from the Torah the same week. And when they're done reading it for the day, they roll the scroll back up and they tie the scroll with a band. That band takes the same shape as a key loop of energy, foundational loop of energy, and they put it back in a cabinet called an ark.
Yeah.
Now, at Göbekli Tepe, the shape of the oval enclosures they have there with the pillars, the Dogon refer to as an ark. They have a drawing that looks just like it. They call it an ark.
Huh.
So this term ark tells us something. So the Egyptian word ark, to cover things over, tells us that it was a ritual act. And what it illustrates is that the instructional purpose of the site was finished. It was brought to a proper completion before they left. And that's what the people on Orkney were trying to do. They were trying to illustrate to somebody like me that they didn't get driven out in the middle of what they were trying to do. They brought it to a proper completion.
That's incredible. That's incredible findings. I love how you put that together. Laird, it's a pleasure to have you back on my show. I would love for you to come back on very soon if you're available
Sure. I'd
periodically.
be happy to
Be a
do it again
regular guest.
anytime. I love the questions you ask. You are focused in all the right directions
Thank you.
to ask the right next question.
Well, they weren't prearranged. They just coming up spur of the moment.
Well, that's the way it should happen,
Yep.
organically.
Thank
Yep.
thank you. You're a
Well,
blessing. I'm glad you live on
we'll
this
see
earth.
what turns up tomorrow with Three Eye Atlas. If there's a reason
Yes.
to talk sooner rather than later, we'll do it.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see what transpires, and if something like that, yeah, we can go back live, even if it's for 20 minutes, just to discuss what
Right.
happened. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. The
Okay.
great Laird Scranton. Go buy his books now. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. We're self-sponsored by the Mystical Spiral Store.